Hey everybody, this video is called What Applies to War, and tonight we're going to continue our pass-through study here in the book of Deuteronomy, looking at the 20th chapter where Moses is going to talk about what applies in the instructions concerning warfare. And today we also have different laws in regards to warfare, such as the Geneva laws, or whatever Geneva they're called. But we're going to look at Deuteronomy chapter 20, and we'll start with verse 1. It says, "When you go out to battle against your enemies and see horses and chariots and people more numerous than you, do not be afraid of them, for the Lord your God is with you, who brought you up from the land of Egypt." So in chapter 20 here, pretty much a breakdown that you can get out of this is Moses is going to give humanitarian principles that are applicable to war under the Mosaic law throughout chapter 20 today. And it's separate of the brutality and the cruelty that the other nations around Israel may have messed with. And when Israelites went in the battle, they were never to fear an enemy's horses or chariots, because the outcome of the battle would never be determined by the size of the army they were to go up against. So it was never determined by basic military strength. And the command to not be afraid was based on God's power and faithfulness, which God had already proved to Israel as he took them out of the land of Egypt when he delivered them. And they could trust the Lord that he would be with them. In verse 2 through 4 it says, "So it shall be when you are on the verge of battle, that the priest shall approach and speak to the people. And he shall say to them, Hear, O Israel, today you are on the verge of battle with your enemies. Do not let your heart faint. Don't be afraid, and do not tremble or be terrified because of them. For the Lord your God is he who goes out with you to fight for you against your enemies, to save you." And the role of the priest in battle was to encourage the soldiers by God's promise, God's presence, and God's power. And the priest was to encourage the soldiers to be strong in their faith. And today, in the army, you might see in the United States that someone that's like this would be the chaplain, who's spiritually motivating soldiers and mentoring soldiers as well. And a lack of trust in God's ability to fight for them would affect their strength of their will, so that they would become faint-hearted. And victory was linked to their faith in God. They had to have their faith in God in order to see victory. And priests weren't numbered back in Numbers chapter 1, verse 47 through 53 among the fighting men of Israel. Their job was to spiritually teach and encourage, as I said. In verse 5 through 9 it says, "Then the officers shall speak to the people, saying, What man is there who has built a new house and has not dedicated it? Let him go and return to his house, lest he die in the battle and another man dedicate it. Also, what man is there who has planted a vineyard and has not eaten it? Let him go and return to his house, lest he die in the battle, and another man eat of it. And what man is there who is betrothed to a woman, and has not married her? Let him go and return to his house, lest he die in battle, and another man marry her. The officers shall speak further to the people, and say, What man is there who is fearful and faint-hearted? Let him go, return to his house, lest the heart of his brethren faint like his heart. And so it shall be, when the officers have finished speaking to the people, that they shall make captains of the armies to lead the people." So there was 4 exemptions within the service of Israel's volunteer army, and that were illustrated here. And the biggest principle out of everything here is that if someone's heart was not in the fight, that they were more of a liability risk, and they needed to go home. They needed to go away. And those who had other matters on their minds, or they were afraid, they were allowed to leave the army and return to their homes, since they would be useless in battle, and then they would also be a negative influence on the others to lose courage. And the size of the army was not vital to God. Israel was never to focus on the size of the army they were going up against, but the heart of the army was far more important for Israel. And Russia is a current event of warfare, and Russia was expected to take Kyiv within 72 hours. And still, as of right now, they do not have full control over the capital of Ukraine. And you could see there that through news reports and such, maybe it's propaganda. I'm not saying it's not. I'm not saying it is. But supposedly Russian troops are demotivated, and that's what's affecting their progress in Putin's call. But in the United States military, one can be discharged as well over having personal affairs not in line, because those personal affairs would affect their mentality on the battlefield, and they're more of a risk than a help. So the United States Army, some people will get discharged. Let's say a single mother who has a child out of wedlock and she doesn't have a plan or family nearby that can assist if she was to deploy. They oftentimes in the military will allow her to discharge. In Judges 7 of Gideon, it was an example of how an army of 300 could still see victory against an opponent with 135,000 troops. And you take 300 troops versus 135,000, that seems impossible for us to fathom. But because God was with the 300, when God is with you, you have the majority. And God gave them the victory. And God commanded that his army have leadership. The army wasn't to make up decisions, whenever they felt like it. They were to have guidance through leadership. And no matter how good soldiers are, they need good leadership. In verse 10 and 11, it says, "When you go near a city to fight against it, then proclaim and offer a peace to it. And it shall be that if they accept your offer of peace and open to you, then all the people who are found in it shall be placed under tribute to you and serve you." So cities that were outside of Canaan were not under the judgment of total destruction. So Israel was to offer them first a peace treaty. And if the city agreed, their people would become the servants of Israel. And if they rejected, let's look at verses 12 through 15 here. It says, "Now if the city will not make peace with you, but war against you, then you shall besiege it. And when the Lord your God delivers it into your hands, you shall strike every male in it with the edge of the sword. But the woman, the little ones, the livestock, and all that is in the city, all its spoil you shall plunder for yourself, and you shall eat the enemy's plunder, which the Lord your God gives you. Thus you shall do to all the cities which are far from you, which are not of the cities of these nations." So Israel, they were to besiege the city that would not accept the peace treaty. They were to besiege them and take the city, and they were to kill the men off and take possession of the rest of the people left and the animals, and that would be known as gains of warfare. In ancient warfare, they didn't do what we see today, where you'll see prisoners of war in modern day warfare. Ancient warfare, they didn't usually have prisoners of war. It was a straight up kill. And plunder provided the wages for the army in ancient warfare. In verse 16 through 18, "But of the cities of these people, which the Lord your God gives you as an inheritance, you shall let nothing that breathes remain alive. But you shall utterly destroy them, the Hittite, and the Amorite, and the Canaanite, and the Perizzite, and the Hivite, and the Jebusite, just as the Lord your God has commanded you. Lest they teach you to do according to all their abominations which they have done for their gods, and you sin against the Lord your God." You see, the Canaanite city, they were to be totally destroyed with nothing to spare in order to destroy their influence that would bring them, Israel, toward idolatry in chapter 7, verse 22 through 26. And the Canaanites was a socially, morally, and spiritually corrupt nation ripe for judgment. And many other passages tell us that. And in verse 19 and 20, to wrap up the chapter, says, when you besiege a city for a long time, while making war against it to take it, you should not destroy its trees by wielding an axe against them. If you eat of them, do not cut down to use in the seas, for the tree of the field is man's food. Only the trees which you know are not trees for food you may destroy and cut down, to build siege works against the city that makes war with you until it's subdued. So when surrounding the city, the armies in the ancient world, they would cut down the trees that would build ramps and weapons as well as facilities for long siege. And however, Israel was not to use fruit trees in the siege of a city so that they could enjoy the fruit of the land that God had given them. And that was stated back in Deuteronomy chapter 7, verse 12 through 13. So to wrap up today's chapter, Moses speaks of the command for Israel to trust God and to not have fear in their circumstances. You see, Israel was going to be up against some battles that would make no sense for any such victory. You're better off to become prisoners of war. But God was with them in their battles when they were obedient to him. And as Christians, as we navigate the Christian walk, we're going to be up against trials and battles of spiritual warfare. And we must remember that God is with us. And when God is with us, then everything else is outnumbered, because God equals everything. Now I want to go over to Romans chapter 8, verse 31. Many of you know this verse, and I like this verse, so I'm going to go over it. It says, what then shall we say to these things? If God is for us, who can be against us? And that's where I say amen. And that's where I say that 1 plus God is majority. When God is with you, you are the majority. And one with God makes an unbeatable majority. And Moses, he showed the command to encourage the people before battle. And Moses gave how to shrink an army and to make it more effective. You see, sometimes having an army isn't about the number of people in it, but it's about the people with the right heart conditions. If there's a lot of toxic within the ranks, that military is not going to succeed. And Moses gave instructions for battle with offering peace as a condition. And without peace, then they must conquer a city through siege and battle. And I want to go over to Matthew chapter 10, verse 11. Matthew 10, verse 11 through 15. It says here, now whatever a city or town you enter, inquire who is worthy, and it is worthy, and stay there till you go out. And when you go into the household, greet it. If the household is worthy, let your peace come upon it. But if it's not worthy, let your peace return to you. And whoever will not receive you nor hear your words, when you depart from that house or city, shake off the dust from your feet. Assuredly, I say to you, it will be more tolerable for the land of Sodom and Gomorrah in the day of judgment than that city. So, within the commissioning of Jesus' disciples, the principle of proclamation of peace comes before judgment. And when we call people to faith, we are offering them peace that is only offered through God. However, if people do not receive Christ and they go on their way into eternity, they're going to be under judgment forever. So It's literally comes down to between you are in peace with God or you are in judgment with God. And Israel was given the command to utterly annihilate the Canaanites, to destroy them. And the chapter, it ends with the command to save trees for food during the seas. And that's going to wrap up this video today. And we'll see you later this week as we look at various laws that are going to talk about murder and family and home situations and all that within the law of Moses. So I hope you have a great rest of your night. God bless, and we'll see you then.